The soft morning light filtered through our bedroom curtains as I slowly stirred from sleep, expecting another ordinary Tuesday in our suburban Phoenix home. The digital clock on my nightstand read 6:47 a.m., and I could hear the familiar sounds of our neighborhood coming to life. Dogs barking in the distance, the hum of early commuters starting their engines, the distant sound of the garbage truck making its weekly rounds through Desert Willow Estates. What I didn't expect was to find my husband Marcus sitting rigidly on the edge of our king-sized bed, fully dressed in his navy business suit, staring at the wall with an expression I'd never seen before. The morning routine we'd perfected over 6 years of marriage had always been predictable and comforting. Marcus would usually be in the shower by now, singing off-key to whatever classic rock song was stuck in his head. I'd make coffee in our kitchen while listening to the local news, and we'd share a quick breakfast before he headed to his architecture firm. It was ordinary, domestic, and I'd never questioned how lucky we were to have found such an easy rhythm together. "Marcus?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes and pushing myself up against the headboard. "You're up early. Don't you have that client meeting at 9? He turned to face me, and the coldness in his brown eyes made my stomach drop. This wasn't the man who had kissed me goodnight just 8 hours earlier, whispering about our upcoming anniversary dinner reservations. This was a stranger wearing my husband's face. "Sarah, we need to talk." His voice was flat, devoid of any warmth or emotion. He stood up and walked to the window, keeping his back to me. "I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen carefully." Something in his tone made every nerve in my body stand at attention. I pulled the comforter closer to my chest, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable in my own bedroom. The bedroom we decorated together 3 years ago when we moved into this house. The bedroom where we'd made love just 2 nights before. "You have a choice to make, Sarah. You can divorce me quietly, take what I'm willing to give you, and walk away with your dignity intact. Or you can fight me on this, and I promise you'll lose everything. The house, the car, your savings, your reputation, everything." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there, paralyzed, trying to process what he'd just said. Divorce? Where was this coming from? We'd had our disagreements like any couple, but nothing that warranted this nuclear option. Just last weekend, we'd been at Home Depot picking out paint colors for the guest bedroom. "What are you talking about?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "Marcus, what's going on? Did something happen? Are you having some kind of breakdown?" He finally turned around, and I saw something cruel flicker across his features. "No breakdown, Sarah. Just clarity. I've been thinking about this for months, and I've made my decision. This marriage is over." I threw off the covers and stood up, my legs shaky but determined. The hardwood floor felt cold under my bare feet, and I could smell the faint scent of the cologne Marcus had started wearing recently, something expensive and sharp that I didn't recognize. When had he started wearing new cologne? When had I stopped noticing the small changes in the man I'd shared a bed with for 6 years? Months? You've been planning this for months and you didn't think to mention it? We just renewed our lease on the lake house for the summer. We have dinner plans with your parents this Saturday. What about the fertility treatments we were discussing? What about the nursery we were going to convert from the spare bedroom? The mention of the fertility treatments hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. We'd been trying to conceive for over a year, going through the emotional roller coaster of hope and disappointment month after month. I'd been taking medications that made me nauseous and emotional, tracking my cycle obsessively, believing that we were building something together. How could he have been planning to leave me while we were trying to create a family? All of that was before I realized what I really wanted. What I really need. He straightened his tie with mechanical precision. "I'm not the same person I was when we got married, Sarah. I have different priorities now, different goals. This suburban life, this whole setup, it's not me anymore." The casual way he dismissed our entire life together sent rage shooting through my veins. Different priorities? What does that even mean? And what's with this ultimatum? Why can't we try counseling? Why can't we work through whatever this is? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Counseling? Sarah, you're not listening. This isn't a problem to be fixed. This is a decision that's already been made. I'm offering you the easy way out because, believe it or not, I don't want to destroy you. But make no mistake, I will if you force my hand. I stared at him, searching for any trace of the man I'd fallen in love with 6 years ago. The man who used to make me coffee every morning before work, who would drive 40 minutes out of his way just to pick up my favorite Thai food when I was sick, who cried during our wedding vows because he said he couldn't believe how lucky he was. I don't understand any of this, I said, my voice growing stronger. You're talking like some corporate raider, not my husband. What happened to you? What happened to us? What happened is that I grew up, Sarah. I stopped settling for mediocre. I stopped pretending that this middle-class fantasy was enough for me. He checked his Rolex, a watch I'd never seen before. I have resources you don't know about, connections you can't imagine, and legal representation that will make your head spin. I'm trying to be fair here, but my patience has limits. Resources I don't know about, I repeated, feeling like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. What resources? We share bank accounts, Marcus. We file joint tax returns. What are you talking about? His smile was patronizing and cold. Oh, Sarah, you really have no idea, do you? You think those business trips to Seattle were all about architectural consulting? You think the promotion I got last year was just based on my design skills? Nayan. Heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. What are you saying? I'm saying that while you were playing house, worrying about grocery lists and mortgage payments, I was building something real, something significant. And it's something you can't be a part of. The room seemed to spin around me. I gripped the dresser for support, trying to make sense of this nightmare. Is there someone else? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I got my answer. Her name doesn't matter, he said finally. What matters is that she understands me in ways you never could. She shares my vision, my ambitions. She's not content with suburban mediocrity. The betrayal hit me like a sledgehammer. Not just the affair, but the months of lies, the careful planning, the way he'd been living a double life while I innocently went about our routine. How many times had he come home from these business trips and made love to me? How many times had he sat across from me at dinner, listening to me talk about my day, all while planning my destruction? How long? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. That's not important. How long, Marcus? He sighed, as if my questions were an inconvenience. 18 months, maybe 2 years. Time blurs when you're busy building an empire. 2 years. We'd been trying to have a baby for the past 1.5 years. While I was taking fertility medications that made me sick and emotional, while I was tracking ovulation cycles and hoping every month that we'd finally get pregnant, he was with someone else. While I was planning surprise birthday parties for him and anniversary getaways, he was falling in love with another woman and plotting to leave me with nothing. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. All those nights when I'd initiate intimacy because my ovulation app told me it was the optimal time for conception, Marcus had been going through the motions while his heart and mind were somewhere else entirely. All those pregnancy tests I'd taken in secret, hoping to surprise him with good news, while he was actively working to end our marriage. All those conversations about baby names and nursery themes while he was planning my destruction. You're a monster, I whispered, the weight of his betrayal settling over me like a suffocating blanket. I'm a realist, he corrected. And I'm offering you a chance to walk away from this with some semblance of dignity. Take it, Sarah. Don't make this harder than it has to be. And if I don't? If I refuse to just roll over and let you destroy our marriage without a fight? His expression hardened. Then I'll show you exactly how much power I've accumulated over the past 2 years. I have evidence of financial irresponsibility on your part, documentation of your erratic behavior, witnesses who can testify to your inability to handle stress. By the time I'm done, you won't just lose everything. You'll be lucky if you can get a job at Starbucks. Evidence? What evidence? I've never been financially irresponsible or erratic. What are you talking about? Sarah, you're so naive it's almost painful. Evidence can be created, behavior can be documented, witnesses can be found. I have resources now that you can't begin to comprehend. I have lawyers who specialize in making problems disappear. I felt physically sick. This man standing in front of me, threatening me, manipulating me, was someone I'd never met before. The Marcus I knew was gentle, considerate, maybe a little ambitious, but never cruel. This person was calculating and cold, speaking about destroying my life like he was discussing the weather. I need time to think, I said, backing toward the bathroom. You have until Friday, he said, checking that mysterious Rolex again. That gives you 3 days to make your choice. Divorce me quietly and take the settlement I'm offering, or fight me and lose everything. Your call, Sarah. He walked toward the bedroom door, then paused with his hand on the handle. Oh, and Sarah? Don't bother trying to access our joint accounts or make any large purchases. I've already taken precautions. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and moments later I heard his BMW start in the driveway. I ran to the window and watched him back out, his movements as calm and controlled as if he were heading to any normal day at the office. I sank onto the floor beside our bed, my legs finally giving out. The room was too quiet now, filled only with the sound of my ragged breathing and the distant hum of morning traffic. Everything looked the same. Our wedding photo on the dresser showing us young and hopeful on that perfect September day, and Sedona, his coffee mug from yesterday morning still on his nightstand with the faint ring stain it would leave if I didn't clean it soon, my romance novel bookmarked on page 127 where the heroine was about to discover her own devastating betrayal. But nothing would ever be the same again. I looked around at the room we decorated together when we first moved into this house. The sage green walls I'd insisted on, the vintage brass lamp Marcus had found at an estate sale, the photographs from our honeymoon in Italy scattered across the dresser. Had any of it ever been real for him? Or had he been playing a role even? Then, building a facade that would eventually crumble? 3 days. He'd given me 3 days to decide whether to surrender my entire life or fight for it. But as I sat there on the carpet we'd picked out together after spending hours at 3 different stores comparing samples, surrounded by the remnants of what I thought was a happy marriage, I realized something that Marcus had clearly underestimated. Wasn't the same naive woman he'd married 6 years ago either, and if he wanted a fight, he was going to get one. I didn't leave the house for the first 24 hours after Marcus's ultimatum. I called in sick to my job at Morrison & Associates Marketing, claiming a stomach bug, which wasn't entirely a lie, considering I couldn't keep food down and had spent most of Tuesday night alternating between crying and vomiting. My supervisor, Janet, was understanding and told me to take care of myself, not knowing that my entire world had imploded in the span of a 15-minute conversation. I spent most of Wednesday moving between the couch and the kitchen table, alternating between crying and furiously Googling divorce lawyers in Phoenix. The internet was overwhelming. Dozens of law firms promising aggressive representation, sympathetic female attorneys who specialized in complex marital dissolution, and legal blogs that made my situation sound both completely hopeless and perfectly winnable depending on which article I read. By Wednesday evening, I'd compiled a list of potential attorneys, read reviews until my eyes burned, and started a notebook where I documented everything I could remember about Marcus's recent behavior. The late nights, the unexplained business trips, the new clothes, and accessories that seemed expensive for someone working at a mid-level architecture firm. Details that had seemed insignificant at the time now felt like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too trusting to put together. By Thursday morning, I'd managed to pull myself together enough to think strategically. If Marcus had been planning this for months, if he really had resources and evidence I didn't know about, then I needed to do my own investigating. I couldn't just react to his threats. I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. I started with our finances. Marcus had said he'd taken precautions with our joint accounts, and when I logged into our online banking, I discovered what he meant. Our savings account, which had contained $47,000 just a week ago, now showed a balance of $3,200. Our checking account had been drained down to the minimum required balance. The only money left untouched was in my personal account from my job, probably because he couldn't access it without my signature. My hands were shaking as I called the bank. "Hi, this is Sarah Chen, and I need to know about some recent transactions on my joint savings account." The customer service representative was polite but firm. "I can see there was a large withdrawal made on Tuesday morning, Mrs. Chen. The account holder, that would be your husband Marcus Chen, transferred $43,800 to an external account." "What external account? I didn't authorize that transfer." "According to our records, both account holders have full access to make transfers without dual authorization. The receiving account is registered to MC Holdings, LLC. MC Holdings, LLC. I'd never heard of it, but the initials were clearly Marcus's. How many other things had he set up without my knowledge? After hanging up with the bank, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of financial betrayal. But I forced myself to think strategically. If Marcus had been planning this systematically, then I needed to approach my response with the same level of calculation. I drove to our neighborhood Starbucks on Scottsdale Road, where the baristas knew my usual order, a medium latte with an extra shot and oat milk, and set up camp with my laptop. If Marcus was monitoring our home internet, I didn't want him knowing what I was researching. The coffee shop was busy with the usual mix of remote workers, college students, and stay-at-home moms grabbing caffeine before school pickup. Surrounded by the normal rhythm of other people's ordinary lives, I felt like an alien visitor from a planet where husbands didn't secretly drain bank accounts and threaten their wives with financial destruction. But the familiar sounds and smells helped ground me as I began my investigation. I started with the basics, searching for MC Holdings LLC in Arizona's business registry. What I found made my blood run cold. MC Holdings LLC had been registered 14 months ago, with Marcus listed as the sole owner and CEO. The business address was a high-end office complex in Scottsdale, nowhere near the architectural firm where he claimed to work. According to the filing documents, the company was classified as Investment Management and Financial Consulting. Investment management? Marcus was an architect. He designed office buildings and shopping centers. What did he know about investment management? I dug deeper, searching for any connection between MC Holdings and his supposed employer, Davidson and Associates Architecture. What I found was even more shocking. Davidson and Associates had never heard of Marcus Chen. When I called their main office, pretending to be verifying employment for a loan application, the receptionist told me they had no employee by that name, and never had. For 2 years, Marcus had been leaving the house every morning, telling me he was going to work at Davidson and Associates, coming home with stories about difficult clients and project deadlines. Where had he really been going? What had he really been doing? I spent the rest of Thursday afternoon creating a timeline. 18 months ago, right around when he claimed his affair started, was also when he'd begun working late more often, when the business trips to Seattle became monthly occurrences, when he'd started being secretive about his phone and laptop. It was also around the time he'd suddenly become interested in expensive clothes and that Rolex I'd never seen before. On Friday morning, with just hours left before Marcus's deadline, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to me just a week earlier. I hired a private investigator. Jennifer Walsh's office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a Chinese restaurant in Tempe, but her credentials were impressive. Former FBI with 15 years of experience, specialized in corporate fraud and infidelity cases. Excellent references from divorce attorneys across the Phoenix metropolitan area. She was about my age, with short red hair and sharp green eyes, and the kind of direct, no-nonsense manner that made me feel like I was finally talking to someone who understood the seriousness of my situation. Her office was small but efficient, with filing cabinets lining one wall and a desk covered with case files and surveillance equipment I couldn't identify. A framed photograph of Jennifer in FBI gear stood next to her computer monitor, a reminder of the expertise she brought to cases like mine. "Your husband sounds like a piece of work," she said, after I'd explained everything. The good news is that guys like this usually get overconfident and sloppy. The bad news is that if he's been planning this for as long as you think, he's probably covered his tracks pretty well. What can you find out in a short time frame? He wants an answer today. Jennifer leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. First piece of advice: don't give him an answer today. Tell him you need more time. If he's really as powerful as he claims, what's he going to do? Ruin your life a little faster? Call his bluff. What if it's not a bluff? Then we need to make sure you have ammunition to fight back. I can have preliminary information for you by Monday, but I need you to understand that this kind of investigation takes time and money. If your husband has been building some kind of financial empire behind your back, unraveling it won't be cheap or easy. I thought about the $8,000 in my personal account, my safety net that was now looking more like a lifeline. How much are we talking about? My retainer is $5,000. That'll get you started with basic surveillance, financial background checks, and a deep dive into his business activities. If we find what I think we're going to find, you'll need that information for your divorce attorney. It was most of my remaining money, but what choice did I have? I wrote the check and signed the contract, feeling like I was taking my first real step toward fighting back. That afternoon, I called Marcus. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and professional. "I need more time," I said without preamble. "Time for what, Sarah? This isn't a negotiation. Time to understand what you're really offering me. Time to consult with an attorney. You've had months to plan this, Marcus. You can give me a week." There was a long pause. "Fine, 1 week. But the offer gets worse every day you delay. Today you could have walked away with $50,000 and your car. Next Friday it might be $25,000 and nothing else." "We'll see," I said, and hung up before he could respond. Over the weekend, I began my own amateur investigation while waiting for Jennifer's professional results. I went through every document in our house, looking for anything that might give me insight into Marcus's secret life. Our home office, which he'd always kept locked but I'd never questioned, became my primary focus. Using a bobby pin technique I'd seen in a movie, I managed to pick the simple lock, a skill I never thought I'd need but was grateful to possess. Inside his office, I found a world I didn't recognize. Business cards for people I'd never heard of, financial advisors, real estate brokers, investment consultants, all with handwritten notes in Marcus's careful script. Investment prospectuses for companies with names like Pacific Growth Ventures and Emerald Capital Solutions that meant nothing to me. Bank statements from accounts I didn't know existed, showing deposits and withdrawals in amounts that dwarfed our regular household income. The most disturbing discovery was a burner phone, hidden in his desk drawer, underneath a stack of architectural magazines. The phone was dead. But when I plugged it in to charge using a cord I found in the same drawer, it revealed a text message history that made me physically sick. The burner phone was dead, but when I plugged it in to charge, it revealed a text message history that made me sick to my stomach. Hundreds of messages between Marcus and someone named Isabella, dating back 22 months. The early messages were flirty but professional, discussions about investment opportunities and business partnerships. But they quickly became more intimate, more personal. "Can't wait to see you in Seattle next week. I've found the perfect property for our expansion." That was from 18 months ago. Sarah suspects nothing. She's too busy playing housewife to notice what's really happening. That was from 6 months ago. "Once the divorce is final, we can make everything official. MC Holdings will be unstoppable with your connections." That was from 3 weeks ago. Isabella wasn't just his mistress, she was his business partner. They'd been building this company together, planning not just to leave me but to use our marriage as a cover while they accumulated assets and connections. Every late night, every business trip, every time he'd come home and kissed me while telling me about his day, it had all been an elaborate lie. But the most shocking discovery came when I searched Isabella's name online. Isabella Rodriguez, managing partner at Pacific Northwest Investment Group, Forbes 30 under 30 in finance, graduate of Wharton Business School. She wasn't just smart and successful, she was everything Marcus had apparently decided I wasn't. Sophisticated, wealthy, connected to high-powered financial networks. Looking at her professional headshots, I could see why Marcus was attracted to her. She was beautiful in an intimidating way, with sharp features and an expensive wardrobe that screamed power and success. Next to her LinkedIn profile, my own looked embarrassingly modest. Marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm, state school, education, middle-class background. Was this what Marcus meant when he said I didn't share his vision or ambitions? Had he always seen me as beneath him? Or had success changed him into someone who could no longer be satisfied with ordinary happiness? By Sunday evening, I was exhausted but determined. I'd gathered enough information to confirm that Marcus wasn't just having an affair. He was involved in some kind of complex financial scheme that I didn't fully understand yet. The text messages suggested they were acquiring properties, moving money, building something that required both of their expertise and connections. But I'd also discovered something else. In all of Marcus's careful planning, in all of his threats, about evidence and witnesses, he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. Monday morning, Jennifer Walsh called with her preliminary findings, and what she told me confirmed my worst fears, while also giving me the first real hope I'd felt in days. Your husband is involved in something much bigger than a simple affair, she said. MC Holdings is just the tip of the iceberg. I've found connections to at least 3 other LLCs, property purchases in 4 different states, and financial transactions that suggest he's been systematically moving assets for over a year. Is it illegal? That's the question, isn't it? Some of it might be legal, but unethical, using marital assets to fund business ventures without your knowledge or consent. Some of it might cross the line into fraud, especially if he's been misrepresenting his income on your joint tax returns. My heart was pounding. What does this mean for the divorce? It means your husband isn't as untouchable as he thinks he is, and it means you have more power in this situation than he wants you to believe. For the first time since Tuesday morning, I smiled. By Tuesday of the following week, I had transformed from a devastated wife into a woman with a plan. The transformation hadn't been easy. I'd spent sleepless nights questioning my own judgment, wondering how I could have been so blind to what was happening in my own marriage. But those doubts had crystallized into determination, and Jennifer Walsh had delivered a comprehensive report that painted a picture of financial deception so elaborate it took my breath away. We met in her office on a gray Tuesday morning, the November weather matching my mood as storm clouds gathered over the Phoenix Valley. Jennifer had spread dozens of documents across her conference table. Bank statements, business filings, property records, and surveillance photographs that documented Marcus's real life versus the fiction he'd been selling me. Marcus hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been systematically stealing from our marriage to fund a business empire I never knew existed. The evidence was damning. Over the past 18 months, Marcus had used our joint credit cards to make business expenses that he'd then claimed as tax deductions for MC Holdings. He'd taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, forging my signature on documents. Most shocking of all, he'd been claiming me as a business partner on tax filings for companies I'd never heard of, making me liable for business debts and potentially criminal tax fraud. The IRS is going to be very interested in this, Jennifer had said, spreading the documents across her desk. Your husband has been playing fast and loose with federal tax law and dragging you into it without your consent. Armed with this information, I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Hendricks, one of Phoenix's most respected divorce attorneys. Her office in downtown Phoenix screamed success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of Camelback Mountain, expensive art that looked like original pieces rather than prints, leather furniture that probably cost more than my car. The receptionist offered me coffee from what looked like a professional espresso machine, and I accepted gratefully, needing caffeine to steady my nerves for what I knew would be a life-changing conversation. But Patricia herself was surprisingly down to earth. A woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of direct manner that reminded me of Jennifer. She wore a simple black suit and minimal jewelry, projecting competence rather than flashiness. Her office, walls were lined with law books and diplomas from prestigious universities, but also family photos that showed her at various stages of life: young attorney, working mother, seasoned professional. "I've seen cases like this before," Patricia said after reviewing Jennifer's report. "Men who think they're smarter than everyone else, who assume their wives are too naive or too dependent to fight back. The good news is that your husband has made several critical mistakes. The bad news is that untangling this mess is going to be complicated and expensive." "How expensive?" "My retainer is $15,000, and a case like this could easily run $50,000 or more if it goes to trial. But here's the thing, Sarah. Based on what I'm seeing here, you're not just entitled to half of your marital assets. You may be entitled to damages for fraud, and your husband could be facing criminal charges." I felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. Criminal charges? Tax fraud, forgery, possibly embezzlement depending on how he's been using marital funds. The document forgery alone is a felony in Arizona. If he's been filing false tax returns with your name on them, the IRS isn't going to care that you didn't know about it. You're both liable. The weight of Marcus's deception was staggering. Not only had he destroyed our marriage and stolen our money, he'd potentially made me a criminal accomplice in the process. "What do we do?" Patricia smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw the expression of someone who was looking forward to a fight. "We go on the offensive. Your husband wants to play hardball? Let's show him what hardball really looks like." The first step was protecting myself from further financial damage. Patricia filed an emergency motion to freeze all marital assets and prevent Marcus from making any additional transfers or withdrawals. She also filed a motion compelling him to provide complete financial disclosure, including all business dealings, bank accounts, and investment activities. But the real shock came when we served Marcus with divorce papers at his office. His real office at MC Holdings, not the fictional job at Davidson and Associates. Jennifer had been surveilling him for over a week, documenting his daily routine. Every morning, Marcus would leave our house and drive to the sleek glass building in Scottsdale where MC Holdings was located. He'd spend his days there, having business meetings, making deals, building the empire he'd told me about. And every evening, he'd come home and pretend he'd been designing buildings for Davidson and Associates. The process server found him in a conference room, apparently in the middle of a meeting with several people in expensive suits. According to the server's report, Marcus went pale when he realized what was happening. His carefully controlled facade cracked for just a moment, long enough for everyone in that conference room to see that the powerful businessman they were dealing with might not be quite as untouchable as he pretended. He called me within an hour, and for the first time since this began, I heard real emotion in his voice: anger, panic, and something that might have been fear. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Sarah?" "I'm protecting myself from a criminal who happens to be my husband," I said calmly. I was sitting in Patricia's office, with her and Jennifer both listening to the call on speakerphone. "Criminal? Are you out of your mind? I offered you a clean divorce with a generous settlement, and this is how you respond? Generous? Marcus, you stole $43,000 from our savings account. You took out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge. You've been filing tax returns with forged signatures and claiming me as a business partner, in companies I've never even heard of. Which part of that sounds generous to you?" There was silence on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was quieter, more controlled. "You don't understand the complexities of what I've been building, Sarah. Yes, I used some marital assets for business investments, but those investments have been profitable. You'll benefit from that in the long run." "I'll benefit?" "Marcus, you were planning to divorce me and leave me with nothing. How exactly was I going to benefit from investments made in companies I'm not even supposed to know about? That was before. The situation has changed now. We can work something out that's fair to both of us. Patricia gestured for me to keep him talking. What kind of situation, Marcus? What exactly have you been doing for the past 2 years? I could hear him breathing heavily. It's complicated, Sarah. I got involved with some people who had access to certain opportunities. High-yield investments, real estate deals, things that required more capital than we had available. I had to move fast, make decisions quickly. There wasn't time to explain everything to you. So you committed fraud instead. It's not fraud. Everything I did was to benefit our future. MC Holdings is worth over $2 million now, Sarah. The properties we've acquired are appreciating rapidly. Yes, I had to be creative with the financing, but it's all going to pay off. Patricia was taking notes furiously. Every word Marcus said was potentially admissible in court, and he was essentially confessing to using marital assets without consent to fund business ventures. Who are these people you got involved with, Marcus? Who's we in this scenario? Another long pause. Business partners, investors, people who understood the vision. Including Isabella Rodriguez? The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear Marcus's mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew. How do you know that name? He asked finally. I know a lot of things, Marcus. I know about the burner phone in your desk. I know about the text messages planning our divorce months in advance. I know about the properties you've been buying in Seattle and Denver and God knows where else. I know about the tax returns you've been filing with my forged signature. Sarah, listen to me very carefully. You're getting involved in things you don't understand. There are people involved in this who don't appreciate complications. Drop the divorce proceedings, accept the settlement I offered, and walk away. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The threat was unmistakable, but instead of scaring me, it made me angry. Are you threatening me, Marcus? I'm trying to protect you. From who? From the criminal enterprise you've built? From your business partners who don't appreciate complications? Or from the IRS agents who are going to be very interested in those forged tax returns? The IRS? His voice cracked slightly. Patricia had already filed the necessary reports to protect me from criminal liability for the tax fraud. If Marcus was going down, he was going down alone. That's right, Marcus. I've already filed amended tax returns and reported the forgery to the appropriate authorities. Whatever criminal liability comes from your business dealings, it's yours. Alone. The line went dead. Marcus had hung up on me. Well, Patricia said, leaning back in her chair with satisfaction. That went better than I expected. He just confessed to fraud, forgery, and possibly tax evasion. And he threatened you, which isn't going to look good to a judge. What happens now? Now we wait for his attorney to contact us. Because after that phone call, Marcus is going to realize he needs legal representation, and fast. The game has changed, Sarah. He's no longer in control of this situation. That evening, I sat in our living room. My living room now, since the court order prevented Marcus from returning to the house, and tried to process how drastically my life had changed in just 2 weeks. The woman who had been jolted awake by an ultimatum was gone, replaced by someone who had just gone toe-to-toe, with a man who thought he could destroy her and won the first round. But I knew this was just the beginning. Marcus had built something complex and potentially dangerous, and dismantling it was going to require every ounce of strength and intelligence I possessed. The naive housewife he'd tried to intimidate was gone forever. In her place was a woman who was just getting started. The call came at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after I'd served Marcus with divorce papers. I was getting dressed for another day of meetings with lawyers and investigators, a routine that had become my new normal, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. The early hour immediately put me on alert. Good news rarely came before. 7 a.m. Sarah, it's Jennifer. You need to get down here right now. The urgency in her voice made my stomach drop. Down where? What's happening? Phoenix Police Department, downtown precinct on Washington Street. They arrested Marcus an hour ago. My hand started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. Arrested for what? Tax fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement, from what I can gather. The FBI raided MC Holdings yesterday evening around 6 o'clock. Sarah, this is bigger than we thought. Much bigger. I could hear background noise on Jennifer's end. Police radios, ringing phones, the controlled chaos of a busy precinct station. The reality of what she was telling me felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in news stories, not to suburban wives in Phoenix. I threw on clothes and drove downtown in a daze. The Phoenix Police Department was a bustling maze of officers and civilians, but Jennifer was waiting for me in the lobby with a grim expression. What exactly happened? I asked. The IRS investigation we triggered led to a federal task force looking into MC Holdings and their business practices. Turns out your husband and Isabella Rodriguez weren't just running investment scams, they were involved in a multi-state money laundering operation. Money laundering. The words hit me like a physical blow. Oh my God. It gets worse. The properties they were buying? Many of them were purchased with money from clients who thought they were making legitimate investments. Isabella would bring in high-net-worth clients through her connections, Marcus would create fake investment opportunities, and they'd use the money to buy real estate in their own names. I sank into a plastic chair, trying to process the magnitude of what Jennifer was telling me. How much money are we talking about? Preliminary estimates suggest they defrauded investors out of over $5 million. The FBI has been building this case for months, Sarah. Your divorce filing and the evidence we uncovered just accelerated their timeline. $5 million. No wonder Marcus had been so confident, so threatening. He'd been playing with numbers that made our little suburban life seem insignificant. What does this mean for me? For the divorce? It means you're no longer just divorcing a cheating husband. You're potentially married to a federal criminal who's facing decades in prison. Over the next several hours, the full scope of Marcus's crimes became clear. He and Isabella had been running what the FBI called a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors while skimming millions for themselves. The real estate purchases were a way to launder the stolen money and create legitimate-looking assets. The business trips to Seattle weren't just romantic getaways. They were operational meetings where Marcus and Isabella would meet with potential victims, usually wealthy retirees looking for high-yield, low-risk investments. Marcus would present himself as a successful architect who'd discovered lucrative investment opportunities in emerging markets, while Isabella provided the financial expertise and connections to make the deals seem legitimate. The most sickening part was learning how they'd used our marriage as part of the con. Marcus would bring pictures of our house, talk about his stable family life, even invite potential investors to dinner parties at our home. I'd unknowingly played the role of the loving wife who legitimized his fake persona as a trustworthy family. Man, I entertained these people, I told Patricia during an emergency meeting that afternoon. I cooked dinner for them, made small talk about their grandchildren, showed them photo albums from our vacations. They were being scammed, and I was part of the show. You were a victim too, Sarah. Marcus used you just like he used everyone else. But knowing I was a victim didn't make the guilt any easier to bear. How many people had trusted Marcus partly because he seemed like a devoted husband? How many retirees had lost their life savings partly because I'd smiled and served them coffee in our living room? The legal implications were staggering. As Marcus's wife, I was potentially liable for some of his debts and legal judgments. The house we lived in might have been purchased with stolen money. Our joint tax returns going back 3 years were now evidence in a federal criminal case. But there was also an unexpected silver lining. Because Marcus had forged my signature on numerous documents and filed false tax returns without my knowledge, I was clearly a victim of identity theft and fraud. The FBI was treating me as a cooperating witness rather than a potential co-conspirator. Your husband made a critical mistake, Agent Sarah Martinez explained during my interview at the FBI field office. He got greedy and sloppy. He used your identity without your consent, which actually helps establish that you weren't a willing participant in the scheme. What's going to happen to him? If convicted on all charges, he's looking at 25 to 30 years in federal prison. The wire fraud alone carries a maximum sentence of 20 years, and there are multiple counts. 25 to 30 years. The man who'd woken me up with an ultimatum just over a month ago might spend the rest of his productive adult life in prison. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, FBI interviews, and media attention that I never wanted but couldn't escape. The story of the Phoenix Investment Ponzi scheme made national news when reporters discovered that the scheme had defrauded victims across multiple states, not just Arizona. Cable news shows picked up the story, particularly fascinated by the angle that the mastermind's wife had been the one to expose him by filing for divorce. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from journalists, producers from True, crime podcasts, and book agents who saw commercial potential in my story. My email inbox filled with messages from strangers, some offering support, others asking for financial help, and a disturbing number from conspiracy theorists who believed I must have been in on the scheme from the beginning. The most difficult calls came from the victims themselves. Elderly couples who had lost their life savings called to thank me for exposing Marcus, but also to share their heartbreak and ask questions I couldn't answer. Why had they trusted him? How could they have been so foolish? Would they ever see their money again? Each conversation was a reminder of the human cost of Marcus's greed and the guilt I felt for unknowingly facilitating their trust in him. The divorce proceedings, which had seemed so important just weeks earlier, became almost secondary to the criminal case. Marcus's assets were frozen by federal marshals, and victim restitution would take priority over any divorce settlement. I was essentially divorcing a man who would have nothing left to give me even if I wanted it. But in a strange way, that was liberating. The house where Marcus and I had lived was seized as part of the criminal proceedings, since it had been purchased with fraudulent funds. But I didn't want to live there anyway. Every room held memories of the lies he'd told and the people he'd deceived. I moved into a small apartment in Tempe and started rebuilding my life from scratch. The hardest part was testifying at Marcus's trial. I had to sit in federal court and recount the details of our marriage, the lies he'd told me, the way he'd used our home and our relationship as props in his elaborate fraud. Marcus sat at the defendant's table in a cheap suit, looking nothing like the confident man who'd threatened to destroy me if I didn't quietly disappear. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine remorse. Not for the crimes he'd committed, but for what he'd lost. The empire he'd built was gone. The woman he'd left me for had turned state's evidence to reduce her own sentence, and the life he'd thought he deserved had evaporated. "Mrs. Chen," the prosecutor asked, "when your husband told you that morning that you could divorce him quietly or lose everything, did you believe he had the power to follow through on that threat?" I looked at Marcus, remembering the fear I'd felt that morning, the way his coldness had made me question everything I thought I knew about our life together. But I also remembered the strength I'd found when I decided to fight back. "Yes, I believed him," I said clearly. But I was wrong. The only person who lost everything was him. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness testified about the money they'd lost, the trust that had been betrayed, the retirement dreams that had been shattered. Marcus's defense attorney tried to paint him as a man who'd gotten in over his head, who'd made mistakes but hadn't intended to hurt anyone. But the evidence was overwhelming. Isabella Rodriguez had already pleaded guilty and been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Her cooperation had provided prosecutors with detailed records of the scheme, including recordings of conversations where Marcus had laughed about how easy it was to fool desperate old people looking for easy money. When the verdict came back, guilty on all 17 counts, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't undo the damage Marcus had caused to so many people, including me. At sentencing, the psych sheet judge gave Marcus 28 years in federal prison. With good behavior, he might be eligible for parole in his 70s. The man who'd thought he was building an empire would spend the next 3 decades in a concrete cell. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright Arizona sunshine and realized that for the first time in over a year, I felt truly free. The divorce had been finalized months earlier, a simple matter once Marcus's criminal conviction eliminated any possibility of him hiding assets or fighting the proceedings. I'd gotten nothing from him financially, but I'd gotten something much more valuable: my life back. The victim restitution process was lengthy and complex. The government had seized millions in assets from Marcus and Isabella, but there were dozens of victims with claims that far exceeded what could be recovered. I was eligible for some compensation as an identity theft victim, but I knew that the elderly couples who'd lost their life savings deserved priority. Instead of focusing on what I'd lost, I decided to focus on what I'd gained. The experience had taught me that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, more resourceful than I'd given myself credit for, and capable of rebuilding my life from nothing. But more than that, it had shown me the importance of fighting back against people who abuse their power, whether they're criminal masterminds or simply bullies who think they can intimidate others into submission. I started a new job at Phoenix, Victim Advocacy Services, a nonprofit organization that helped people navigate the aftermath of financial crimes. My own experience made me uniquely qualified to understand what they were going through. The betrayal that made you question your own judgment, the fear that you'd never be able to trust anyone again, the practical challenges of rebuilding credit and finances after being victimized by someone you trusted. The work was emotionally demanding but deeply rewarding. I helped elderly couples understand their rights in restitution proceedings, assisted identity theft victims in clearing their credit reports, and provided emotional support to people whose lives had been shattered by financial predators. Each success felt like a small victory against the Marcus Chens of the world. 6 months after Marcus's sentencing, I was contacted by a publisher who wanted me to write a book about my experience. The idea felt strange at first, turning the worst period of my life into a commodity. But as I thought about all the people who might benefit from hearing the story, I realized it could be another way to help. The book, Waking Up to Betrayal: How I Exposed My Husband's Criminal Empire, became a bestseller. Not because people were fascinated by the crime itself, but because they connected with the story of someone who'd been knocked down and found the strength to fight back. I used the advance from the book to buy a small house in Sedona, surrounded by red rocks and desert silence that felt like the opposite of everything Marcus had represented. It was modest compared to the suburban palace where we'd lived our lie, but it was entirely mine, purchased with money I'd earned through my own strength and resilience. 2 years after that morning when Marcus woke me with his ultimatum, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, to watch the sunrise over the red rocks of Sedona. The early morning light painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, and I could hear the distant call of coyotes welcoming the dawn. It was a sound that had initially frightened me when I first moved here, but now it represented wildness and freedom, qualities I'd never associated with myself until Marcus forced me to discover them. My morning routine had evolved into something that nourished my soul rather than simply marking time. I started each day with meditation on my back patio, followed by coffee made with beans from a local roaster, and then a review of my schedule for helping other victims find their strength. It was a far cry from the suburban routine I'd shared with Marcus, but it was authentically mine in a way that our old life had never been. Saw the interview you did on Good Morning America yesterday. You were amazing. Proud of you, warrior. Warrior. I liked that. The woman who'd been paralyzed by fear and betrayal had become someone who fought for justice, who helped other victims find their strength, who'd turned devastation into purpose. That evening, I got a call from Patricia Hendricks, my divorce attorney who'd become another unlikely friend through the process. Sarah, I have some news you might find interesting. Marcus filed an appeal of his sentence. An appeal? On what grounds? His new attorney is arguing that his sentence was excessive, that he was just a small player in Isabella's larger scheme. They're also claiming that his mental state was compromised during the time he committed the crimes. I almost laughed. Even from prison, Marcus was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still trying to present himself as a victim rather than taking responsibility for his choices. Will it work? Highly unlikely. Federal appeals courts don't often reduce sentences in fraud cases this clear-cut. But Sarah, there's something else. He wants to see you. The request hit me like a physical blow. See me? Why? According to his attorney, he wants to apologize in person. He claims he's found religion in prison and wants to make amends. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the man who'd sat across from me in that courtroom, who'd looked so small and defeated in his cheap suit. Did I want to hear his apology? Did I need his remorse to complete my own healing? No, I said finally. I don't need his apology, Patricia. I don't need his remorse or his explanation or his version of making amends. I needed those things too, years ago, when he was destroying our marriage and planning to leave me with nothing. Now, I've moved on. Are you sure? Sometimes closure can be... I have closure, I interrupted. I have a life he can't touch, a career helping people he hurt, and a strength he could never take away from me. That's all the closure I need. After I hung up, I sat on my back patio watching the stars appear over the desert. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of coyotes calling to each other across the landscape. It was the kind of peace that Marcus, with his constant scheming and manipulation, had never been able to appreciate. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from a woman named Carol whose husband had been convicted of embezzling from his employer. I'd been helping her navigate the legal system and rebuild her credit score. Sarah, I got the job. Assistant manager at the credit union. They were impressed by my experience dealing with financial fraud. I start Monday. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Messages like that came regularly now, from women who'd been betrayed by husbands, from elderly couples who'd been scammed by investment fraudsters, from people who'd found themselves on the wrong side of financial crimes and needed someone who understood their experience. Each message reminded me of why I'd survived Marcus's betrayal, why I'd found the strength to fight back, why the worst thing that had ever happened to me had somehow led to the most meaningful work of my life. The Aday, woman who'd been jolted awake by an ultimatum, no longer existed. In her place was someone who woke up every morning with purpose, who helped other people find their own strength, who'd learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're really made of. Marcus had been wrong about many things, but he'd been especially wrong about me. He'd thought I was too weak to fight, too naive to understand what he was doing, too dependent on him to survive on my own. Instead, I'd become someone who fought for justice, who understood the complexities of financial crime better than most attorneys, and who'd built a life more meaningful than anything we'd had together. As I locked up my house that night and prepared for another day of helping victims find their way forward, I realized that Marcus's ultimatum had been the best thing that ever happened to me, not because of what it took away, but because of what it forced me to discover about myself. The devastation he'd tried to create had become my empowerment. The life he'd tried to steal had become a life worth living. And the woman he'd tried to destroy had become someone who spent her days making sure other people knew they could survive anything. In the end, I hadn't just won the battle Marcus started that morning. I'd won something much more valuable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to survive anything, smart enough to fight back against anyone, and resilient enough to turn the worst betrayal into the foundation for the best version of myself. Saten, my ultimatum that was supposed to destroy me, had set me free.